The Underground Railroad. We've all learned of the trials and tribulations that fugitive slaves went through to get to freedom. But what if that history was all around you this whole time? Oswego County, located in upstate New York, sits right on Lake Ontario. Some consider the city of Oswego as the port city for its historical trade route with Canada through Lake Ontario. At one point in history, Oswego may have been the largest border trade port in the country. But there's more to Oswego County and the port of Oswego than meets the eye. Within the county and city itself, there are many historic Underground Railroad sites, both recognized by the National Register of Historic Places and some with just a known robust history. In fact, Oswego has the second most Underground Railroad sites than any other county in the country. Some of these sites include the Bristol Hill Church Volney, the Oswego Public Library, and the Star Clark Tin Shop in Mexico. Star Clark and his tin shop were very active in the local abolitionist movement. Today, the tin shop is home to an Underground Railroad museum run by Jim Hotchkiss and Allie Proud. Since Oswego was such a bustling trade route, many abolitionists in the area took advantage of this and used the port city of Oswego and the many boats coming through the city to transport former slaves across Lake Ontario to Kingston, Canada, to their freedom.
We have a lot of stories here that are documented. And that's because Star Clark wrote to the newspapers stories about the Underground Railroad in Mexico. He didn't sign his whole name, he signed them C. And they were in Underground Railroad and abolitionist newspapers in the Northeast. There was one in Rochester, The Friend of Man, that he wrote to quite often, and we have some quotes downstairs from that. But they certainly didn't document all of the stories of slaves coming through Mexico.
There are many notable abolitionists and figures that lived and traveled through Oswego County. People such as Frederick Douglass, who came to Oswego County to deliver a eulogy for fellow abolitionist Asa Wing, and Gerrit Smith, who founded the Oswego Public Library.
Asa Wing was a speaker. He wasn't a doer of abolitionist things. He didn't guide the slaves from place to place. He more or less spoke about them. He would go all over New England and certainly New York State and give lectures and debate those that thought slavery was a good thing. He would try to convince people that slavery was wrong. He died young. He was 38 years old when he died. And Frederick Douglass, who I'm sure you've heard of, came here to Mexico and spoke this eulogy at the cemetery. There were others. Reverend Thomas Week was a Presbyterian minister and an abolitionist. Quaker Wells, it was Alfred Quaker Wells. He lived out just east of here. His graveyard was a family graveyard, and that still exists out here. He was a worker abolitionist. He would help people get from place to place. A lot of the plans for the slaves' escapes to Canada were made right here at a table just like this one in this very room. We have a letter, it's on that column under the candle. It's from Gerrit Smith. You probably know who Gerrit Smith is or was. He was the leader of the abolitionist movement. And that letter is a letter to Star Clark, thanking Clark for helping this family get to Canada and to freedom. And that's transcribed from an original letter that we have.
Gerrit Smith ran for president 3 times and was at one point considered the richest man in the state. He funded and opened the Oswego Public Library in 1855 on 2 conditions. 1, the library was to be located on the east side of the river. And 2, every person, regardless of race, complexion, or condition, was to be allowed in the library. Stories of the abolitionist movement and Underground Railroad in Oswego County illustrate how, despite popular belief, the Underground Railroad was not as secretive as some may have believed. The Underground Railroad and freeing of former slaves was a community effort.
Yeah, it was a secret from 1850 on, after the federal law that prohibited helping slaves escape. After that point, it was really secret. Before then, it was not too well known, but it was known in the community. The people in Mexico knew that this was an Underground Railroad station, and they would actually help the slaves get here and then eventually move on to Canada.
Specific stories like the famous Jerry Rescue illustrate the local community efforts within the Oswego Underground Railroad. On October 1st, 1851, federal slave catchers came to Syracuse and arrested a man who called himself Jerry, also known as William Henry. Jerry was arrested at his workplace, where he was a barrel maker under the fugitive slave law. Word of the arrest quickly traveled through the city of Syracuse, and by nighttime, a crowd had formed equipped with the tools to help Jerry escape. After much commotion, Jerry was surrendered by the marshals to the crowd and was hidden in the home of a local butcher named Caleb Davis. Eventually, the two made their way north to Mexico, and eventually to the port of Oswego.
There was a toll gate. And this is a picture of the toll gate
Just
in
like the
Brewer.
throughway.
Yep. And you see, there's the road. You had to drive through and stop, and there's the toll keeper right there with his hand out. and when Jerry and the butcher got to the Plank Road toll gate, they just went right on through. And when the police got there, they had a terrible time arousing the toll keeper. And when he came out, he didn't have the right change, and he had to go back inside, and he fumbled around, and finally he came out, and they could go through. Well, by that time, Jerry and the butcher were long gone, and they came right here to Mexico. The story of the Jerry Rescue, there have been some books written about it, and he magically, somehow, it's transported from Syracuse to Oswego. They don't give us any credit in the books.
They forget the Mexico connection.
But we have a newspaper article that was sent to the local newspaper in 1899 by the fellow who by this time is an old man, who went out and fed the chickens. And he said, I want to set the record straight. This is how what happened and when it happened, and so we do have proof that Jerry indeed came to Mexico.
There are other sights to see while on the Oswego County Freedom Trail, and although many former slaves escaped through Oswego to Canada, some even settled down in the city. Right on 134 West Bridge Street is a vacant lot which once had the home of Charles Smith and Tudor E. Grant. Tudor E. Grant was formerly enslaved in Maryland, but in Oswego, he was an outspoken abolitionist, barber, and African-American leader. The barbershop Grant worked at is known as the Bookout Jones Building on the corner of West First and Bridge Street, and was once owned by white abolitionist Abram Bookout. The Market House on Water and Bridge Street was once a place of political importance within Oswego, and even at one point housed the Oswego City Hall. In 1850, the National Liberty Party met at the Market House, where they nominated Gerrit Smith and a formerly enslaved African-American minister Samuel R. Ward for President and Vice President of the United States. You can find all these places and more on Oswego County's driving tour of the Freedom Trail. It's easy to feel detached from a history that took place so long ago. But clearly, this history is still all around us, especially within Oswego County. There might even be a thing or two we can learn today through the community and the stories of the Underground Railroad in Oswego County.
You learn what you're going to do in the future from the past. And I think people learned from the Underground Railroad, and we try to teach them, because they weren't here at the time, we try to teach them what the Underground Railroad did so that they'll do the right thing in the future.